Okay, some immediate kind of response to that. Let's not forget Spain leaving the euro doesn't just have consequences in Spain. The impact on other European countries would be pretty dramatic as well. So I think another reason to think very somberly about that as an option. I want to come at it from a very different perspective, a very different lens. And given that the kind of remit is thinking about where we might be in 10 years or what are the issues over the next 10 years, there are two things going on. One's the immediate crisis, the other one is to do with the longer term kind of trends that come with this crisis. And the one thing we know from the experience of the 80s and the experience of the 90s is that what follows these rapid increases in unemployment is long-term unemployment. Yeah? And it's not a very optimistic kind of thing to be saying, but actually it's fairly predictable now that there's populations who are joining the unemployment queues who, if current policy levers stay the same, are likely to be out of work for long, long periods. I was quite shocked to see the data already from the first presentation about the number of people who've been unemployed for over 3 years in the Spanish situation. Notice the number of people who've been out of work for over a year is well over 40%, it must be moving towards 50% now. So this long-term unemployment is a serious kind of issue. The other thing we know from the previous recessions is that whilst the argument and the discussion about people with degrees is very interesting, many of the unemployed don't have degrees. They're fairly low skilled, worked in the construction sectors, areas like that. And what we know is that periods of prolonged unemployment, certainly from the countries I know best, which are the Anglo-speaking countries, prolonged unemployment as a young person has scarring effects. They stay with you for the rest of your life. Yeah? We see that in people's earning possibilities, etc. So these are real reasons for intervening around that. So the brief I've been given is to say, to talk about kind of labour market flexibility, and I'm cheating a little bit because I'm going to talk about labour market flexibility, by which the shorthand is really, this is about workers' terms and conditions, about how wages are set, about the ease of hiring and firing people. It's a shorthand for that. But I'm also going to talk about another dimension, which is what the OECD would call activation, which is how do you re-engage those unemployed people? How do you use your benefit system to actually reconnect and re-equip people for getting jobs as soon as they can and not maybe falling into kind of patterns of long-term unemployment that we saw. If we look again at the 80s and 90s, one of the things that became fairly clear there is that the countries responded very differently to the levels of unemployment they had. Unemployment fell at different rates in different countries, and what we know is that's got something to do with the labour market institutions in those countries. And those countries which had more labour market flexibility recovered quicker, they've had lower unemployment levels and higher participation rates than comparable countries. Countries with rigid labour market arrangements both have a massive insider and outsider problem, but also when they did introduce reforms, created a real dualism in the labour market, which I think is characteristic of the Spanish kind of situation. Okay. The crucial thing, I think, in terms of trying to think about how we deal with problems is we've both got to respond to the immediate crisis, but do it in ways that are consistent with meeting some of the longer-term trends that are also pressing on the problem. Yeah? It isn't just about the immediate slump, crash in demand, financial crisis. There are also in the background massive trends in Europe around ageing populations, around changing forms of the family, and this all impacts on the social safety net, on the degrees of flexibility in systems to deal with them. Okay, so what I'm trying to kind of suggest here is that there are ways in which we can organise labour market arrangements that are more conducive to employment growth and that encourage people to not sink into long-term unemployment. And there are kind of three kind of basic strategies that you see countries using. One of them is simple deregulation, right? The 1980s in the United Kingdom was a great example of that. The Thatcher government had a bonfire of labour market regulations. Minimum wages went out of the window. The ease of hiring and firing people became much easier. Surprise, surprise though, it didn't work. We still had very high structural long-term unemployment. One of the missing parts of the equation was they did nothing about the benefit system. In fact, what happened with the benefit system is it became part of the problem. Large numbers of particularly older workers were dumped into the benefit system and left there, and at best were encouraged to take early retirement or shifted on to disability benefits. So simple deregulation in itself didn't work. Another thing that became fairly clear is that what it is about also smart regulation. In Europe, we're proud of talking about a European social model. We use that in distinction principally to the US, but also to Japan. And there are some essential kind of values and essential things that we want to keep in our systems, in our welfare systems, that mean we don't want to go down the simple kind of deregulation route. So I think there's an alternative strategy which is about re-regulation and it's about smart regulation of the labour market. One of the things we've learned very much over the last 20, 30 years, I think, is that high levels of social spending, for example, aren't necessarily incompatible with flexible labour markets and high employment levels. The Scandinavian countries are great examples of that. And clearly one of the issues and ways in which we're trying to work and change systems is to move towards not necessarily the Scandinavian model, but in that horrible new phrase from Denmark and the Netherlands, trying to create systems of flexicurity that provide security for workers when they lose work and still have families, still have to have bread on the table and things like that, but are flexible in work. And those involve a whole set of kind of changes, both to conventional flexibility in terms of the ease of hiring and firing people, people's rights at work, and those areas, but also radical changes in how we think about our welfare to work systems and our benefit and active labour market programme systems. Okay, so where Europe is at the moment on that is in the European Commission has its strategy of Europe 2020. We're thinking about different national pathways to flexicurity kind of systems, and I want, on a very superficial understanding of the Spanish situation, but out of the depth of the kind of work I do on reforms to social welfare systems, make three kinds of suggestions about areas that might be worth thinking about in terms of debate and ways to actually change things. Okay. The first thing would be to think about a radical redesign of the out-of-work benefit systems that are available for people. Relatively generous in Spain, as I understand it, something like 75% of previous wages for 6 months, and then continuing entitlement for another 18 months, and beyond that, unemployment assistance, and then there's a cliff edge where the financial supports actually kind of disappear. One of the common debates in the countries I've studied where big inroads were made into reducing levels of long-term unemployment were some very simple kind of reforms. One is to actually, because there are lots of detailed changes underneath them, but they're superficially very simple. One of them is to actually change what it is you're doing with a benefit. Why is it unemployment benefit? Yeah? In Canada and Japan, it's called employment insurance. Yeah? It's about getting you into the next job, not paying you for not having a job. In the UK, it's called a job search allowance, not an unemployment benefit. In Australia, it's called a New Start allowance because it's about re-engaging you, re-equipping you for the labour market with a big message about the new types of responsibilities you have, the attitudes, that it is your responsibility to look for work. We as the state, as the public part of that equation, have a responsibility to help you do that, but ultimately it's your responsibility, and the conditions and the expectations that go with receiving benefits reflect that. And again, in all the countries where big reforms have taken place like this, politicians have been very, very clever and careful about having relatively simple slogans that actually convey this real big change in message. In the Netherlands, it was work above income. Yeah? In Germany, I won't torture the German language by trying to say it, but it was supporting or obliging as part of the Hartz reforms. In the UK, it was rights and responsibilities. In Australia, it was a mutual obligation. So fairly simple change, but actually underneath it, radical change to your out-of-work benefit system.
So I think you have two more, right? I'm just
I've got one more.
Oh, okay.
One more.
Right. Great.
That simple one has lots of things in it. The second one is the agencies and institutions that work alongside and deliver benefits and seek to assist people get back into work, particularly the long-term unemployed. Again, what we've learned from the 80s and 90s is that the design and delivery of your benefit systems is linked to both the levels and durations of unemployment. So this is only one element of a possible kind of solution, but it's one where the levers for government are fairly strong. And I think here it's radical change in trying to shift these systems away from benefit processing and payment mechanisms, much of which can be done through technology these days, towards employment-focused service deliverers, right? And that has all kinds of implications for how those organisations work and are organised. Principally, they should be judged in terms of how many people they get into jobs, not in how well they manage their budgets. Yeah? And those are some of the reform processes that have been taking place in a number of different countries. We can talk about different ways of actually doing it. The second element, and I think this is a really interesting element, largely in the Anglo countries so far, but increasing experimentation in Europe, is contestability. Yeah? We have, as part of the public sector, very large public employment services, which tend to do things in fairly traditional ways and are very comfortable in the way they do things. There is an emerging sector of innovative entrepreneurial organisations, for-profits, non-profits, that work in this space, who actually should be encouraged to kind of deliver services and to help people get back into work. And we need to design systems that allow that contestability to take place. One of the interesting things they found in France, for example, was when they introduced contestability, lo and behold, the for-profits didn't perform better than the public sector. Why? Because the public sector pulled its finger out and started performing better because there was the threat of competition. So two simple ideas to leave you with: contestability on the one level, activation on the other level.
Terrific. Thank you.